Caracas, capital of Venezuela, with its miles of sandy beaches facing north towards the Atlantic Ocean. It was here that a group of British canoeists found time to relax after the first leg of an expedition which had so far brought them 4,000 miles across the world. Venezuela, occupying over 350,000 square miles of the South American continent, falls just north of the equator. For much of its area, it's covered by a thick blanket of tropical rainforest. From the rain-soaked forests of the interior, the country is drained to the north by a network of tributaries which eventually converge to form the massive Orinoco River. The enormous volume of water swells the river to over a mile wide in places, but islands within its path constrict the river to form a series of rapids, cataracts, and whirlpools. The longest of these rapids extends for over 50 miles and forms the largest physical barrier between the upper and lower Orinoco. It was to this area that the 5 canoeists were heading. It was called the Maipure Rapids. Mike Jones, who is a doctor, led the expedition. In the past, he has descended rivers such as the Blue Nile in Africa, and more recently the Dudkosi River, which has its source at 18,000 feet on the slopes of Everest. Pete Midwood is a 23-year-old student teacher who has previously canoed the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon in America. Ronnie Kennedy, a 21-year-old mining engineer from Scotland, was the youngest member of the party. Dave Manby gained his experience in Austria and Switzerland, as well as taking part in the Everest expedition. So too did John Gosling, whose organizing ability was a great asset on that expedition, and again he managed to handle the practical problems with confident efficiency. Their arrival in Caracas marked the end of 6 months of planning and preparation. All the equipment they had brought with them had been either bought or borrowed, especially for the expedition. Raising the necessary cash for the flights had been their greatest problem. But at the time of their departure from England, they had managed to raise money from diverse sources such as an oil company and a Sunday newspaper. The first 2 weeks of their stay was spent training on some of the smaller rivers of Venezuela. But the traveling overland became increasingly more difficult the further inland they went. Eventually, they arrived at the lower reaches of the Orinoco. At this point, the river is calm and navigable to small boats, and so they used the local transport to take them on the next step of their journey further upstream. This solution had seemed the best idea at the time, but out of the 4 boats they hired, 3 of them broke down due to engine trouble. It became a major headache to take them all, as each time they had to repack all their gear into smaller boats. All that was needed was another overland journey which brought them to a point upstream of the Maipure Rapids. The canoes, specially built in Warrington, were designed to provide the maximum amount of buoyancy. This also gave the canoeists the best maneuverability in heavy water. The food had been chosen for its practical rather than its nutritional value, and this was then packed into waterproof bags and carried in the boats. The locals delighted in showing the group the insect life which thrived in this tropical climate. This centipede can grow up to 8 inches in length, many times the size of its European equivalent. These fish are piranhas. Although they are smaller examples of the species, a school of them are known to be extremely dangerous and can strip the flesh of even very large animals. However, their major concern was to be the large alligators, which they were told inhabit the Orinoco along most of its length. Finally, after a day's rest, they were ready to begin. Each canoeist wore a crash hat of toughened plastic, as well as their all-important life jacket. A neoprene spray cover sealed them into their canoes, yet also allowed them complete movement from the waist. It was just about midday when they started the canoeing. The boats were fully loaded, and the temperature was getting close to 100 degrees in the shade. The first rapid they came to had never been canoed before. After inspecting it from the bank, Mike shot it first on the far side, disappearing for a few seconds behind a rock. Everyone else chose the left-hand channel. Inspecting the boats after the first rapid made them wonder if the decks would be able to take the full force of the river. But the stop also gave everyone a chance to cool down. Soon it was back to the canoeing. The rapid eventually washed out into a calm section, and just as the light was failing, the water ahead of them suddenly became infested. John Gosling.
It was the end of a long day, and dusk was just coming down, and Pete and I were paddling along, Pete just in front of me, and there was a splashing ahead. We couldn't really see what it was too dark. We paddled over towards it, and the splashing just got larger and larger. And Pete said, what did I think it was? And I said, well, I don't know. And we kept on paddling, and Mike Jones came paddling up quite quickly behind us and shouted at us that it was alligators. And Pete and I sort of looked at one another, and Mike shouted, get out the way, quick. And we didn't need to be told twice. We were sprinting off at a fair old rate of knots down the river.
Next morning, although reluctant to go anywhere near the river, they once again paddled their canoes to the head of the rapids. Their confidence was running high once more, and expecting to find a series of falls, they took the more constricted channel around a group of islands. Once past the islands, the river widened out again, but the volume of water was still large enough to create rows of haystack waves running for miles down the center of the river. This was the last rapid to face, and soon they had completed the 50 miles of the Maipure Rapids. Within these 50 miles had been some of the largest rapids they had ever seen. The river had taught them a lot. How to canoe the massive standing waves of the Orinoco, and how to survive and be self-sufficient with the minimum of equipment. It had been an experience for them all.